Alexis Rowe never had the luxury of dreaming big. Dreams, in her neighborhood, were things you read about in books, things you watched on screens. But for girls like her, raised in a small two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Brooklyn, they didn't pay the bills. Her mother, June Rowe, worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and the fridge from humming empty. From a young age, Alexis learned not to ask for more than what was offered. When kids at school talked about Disney World or class trips, she kept her head down. When they wore the newest sneakers, she cleaned hers with a toothbrush every Sunday night, trying to make them look new. But beneath her quiet, obedient exterior was a storm of focus. Alexis was smart, not just good grades smart. She was calculating, sharp. She could read a room better than most adults by the time she was 12, and she knew her ticket out wasn't in begging for chances. It was in becoming the chance. She made straight A's, turned down parties, took advanced placement courses, interned for free at a local print shop during summers. By the time she finished college, top of her class in business administration, she already had 3 small brands on her portfolio and enough saved to move to Manhattan. Not for glamour, for survival. She moved into a cramped studio in Washington Heights with peeling paint and a shared hallway bathroom. She didn't care. She just needed a foot in the door. And that door? It was Marek and Company. Marek and Company wasn't your average firm. The company was ruthless, sharp, and always 10 steps ahead in the marketing game. The kind of place where interns cried in bathroom stalls and executives worked weekends with smiles made of tension. The CEO, Colson Marek, was known across the industry as a genius strategist with a cold heart. His vision turned startups into empires, but his people rarely lasted long. He demanded perfection, and when he didn't get it, he cut ties clean. But Alexis wasn't afraid. When she walked into the marble lobby on the day of her interview, she wore a fitted navy suit, a low bun, and calm confidence. She had memorized the company's brand Bible, stalked every team leader on LinkedIn, and rehearsed 50 possible interview questions. She met with HR, then the chief of staff, then, unexpectedly, with Colson Marek himself. He was seated in a sleek, glass-walled office with no personal pictures, no clutter, just order. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he didn't smile when she entered. He simply nodded toward the seat across from him. "You're younger than I expected," he said, without emotion. Alexis didn't blink. "I'm more efficient than most people twice my age." He tilted his head slightly. "That sounds like arrogance." "It's accuracy." A long silence. Then he said, "I like accuracy." That was the only sentence that passed for approval. 3 days later, she got the offer. Executive assistant to the CEO. High pressure, high expectations, high exposure. Exactly what she wanted. The first month at Marek and Company nearly broke her. She worked 12-hour days. Colson didn't tolerate errors. If she missed a name on a calendar or forgot to prep a file, she heard about it. Not in anger, but in ice. He wasn't loud. He was surgical. One disapproving look from him could ruin your whole week. But Alexis adjusted. She got faster, sharper. She began anticipating his requests before he said them. She color-coded his calendar, streamlined communication chains, and created her own system for handling last-minute crises. The staff started going through her before daring to approach Colson. He noticed. He didn't compliment her, but he started leaving his coffee cup near the trash, an unspoken trust that she'd clear it. He no longer double-checked her notes. When a junior manager submitted sloppy numbers in a meeting, Colson raised an eyebrow and asked, "Did Alexis see this?" "No, sir." "Then you'll fix it before she does." That was the first time anyone heard him mention her name with weight. Still, they weren't friends. They rarely made small talk. They didn't laugh in the elevator. Their relationship was functional, professional, and tightly drawn. But sometimes she caught him watching her type while he dictated. Sometimes he'd pause before saying thank you, as if it took effort. Once, during a late-night meeting, She looked up from her laptop to find him watching her with a look she couldn't decode. He looked away quickly. She pretended not to notice. There was one day, the day she realized something had shifted. Coulson had a brutal investor call. 3 accounts on the brink of collapse. He didn't say a word after, just walked past her desk and closed the office door. 10 minutes later, she knocked gently and walked in without waiting. He didn't look up. She walked to the side table, poured him a glass of water, and set it down. He finally looked at her. For a moment, his face dropped its weight. The tension slid off his shoulders like armor being set aside. "Thank you," he said quietly. It was the first time he'd said it and meant it. That was when she knew he wasn't just her boss anymore. And that scared her. Because feelings were dangerous in places like this, especially when they weren't returned. Or worse, when they were. It was around that time that Alexis started waking up before her alarm. Not because she was anxious, because she was eager. She wanted to get to the office before anyone else. She wanted to prep the conference room herself. She wanted to be the one who greeted Coulson when he walked in, coffee in hand, schedule memorized, answers ready before he asked. She started noticing things. The way he adjusted his tie when something irritated him. How he tapped his pen 3 times when he was trying to stay calm. How he never looked anyone in the eye when talking about anything remotely personal. He noticed things too. He once asked if she had lunch that day. She hadn't. He brought her a protein bar without saying a word. Another time, she coughed twice during a meeting. The next morning, there was a fresh bottle of cough syrup on her desk. No note attached. Those were the kinds of moments that made her question what they were. She'd tell herself it was nothing. That Coulson Marek didn't do feelings. That she was imagining the tension in the room every time their hands brushed while exchanging files. But then came the night. Everything shifted. It had been a good day. The firm landed a major account. Coulson was unusually relaxed. The whole leadership team went out for drinks. Alexis only planned to stay for a few minutes, but Coulson raised an eyebrow when she stood to leave early. "Stay," he said. "1 drink." So she stayed. The bar was rooftop, upscale, tucked into a quiet corner of Midtown. The city lights glittered beneath them. Laughter filled the air, but Alexis and Coulson slowly drifted away from the group, each of them leaning against the railing, as if the noise had faded into background static. He asked her questions he never asked before. Why marketing? Why New York? What's the first thing you bought with your own money? She answered honestly. Because storytelling changes perception. Because I didn't want to end up like my mother, tired and invisible. A bus ticket to come here. He didn't judge her answers. He listened. Then he told her something that made her stomach twist. My father thought emotions were for people who couldn't lead, so I learned to silence mine early. Too early, maybe. She looked at him. For the first time, really looked. And what she saw wasn't a billionaire CEO. It was a man who'd been taught that being soft meant being weak. She reached for her wine glass, but his hand brushed hers first. Neither of them moved. His thumb grazed her wrist, and then he leaned in, slowly, as if giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a soft kiss. No rush, no hunger, just 2 people standing still in a city that never did. When they pulled apart, he didn't say anything. Neither did she, but the way he looked at her, without the usual guard, told her everything. What followed wasn't fireworks. It was slow, quiet, careful. They didn't talk about it the next morning at the office. But things changed. He started asking her to stay later. She started staying, even when she didn't have to. It wasn't just physical. It wasn't even about passion. It was about presence. He didn't rush her. She didn't demand promises. Their hands would brush at work, and neither would flinch. Some nights, she'd end up in his penthouse, ordering takeout, sitting on the couch in one of his shirts, watching him read while she reviewed emails. He never told her he loved her. She never asked if he did. But in that season, Alexis felt something she hadn't in a long time. Safe. And then it ended. Not with a fight. Not with a confession. With a stranger in her seat. She walked into the office like any other Monday. Coffee in hand. To-do list in mind. Only, when she turned the corner, someone else was at her desk. A young woman. Blonde. Confident. Already logged in. Confused. Alexis froze. "Excuse me, that's—" The girl looked up, then stood. "You must be Alexis. I was told you might stop by today." She blinked. "Stop by? I just started." Executive assistant to Mr. Marek. Alexis's heart sank. She walked down the hallway, past glass offices, into the corner where Coulson's door was always slightly open. This time, it was shut. Her phone buzzed. An email from HR. Subject: transition of role. Dear Ms. Rowe, your position has been eliminated during our ongoing structural changes. Please find attached your severance documents and final check details. She couldn't breathe. She turned around, walked straight to the elevator. As she stood there, box in arms surrounded by people who wouldn't meet her eyes, she knew two things. 1. He didn't have the courage to face her. 2. He never planned to. And that broke her more than any kiss ever could. Alexis didn't talk about what happened at work. Not to her mother. Not to her old college roommate who still lived in Harlem. And especially not to herself. Because even thinking about the kiss, that kiss, meant facing the truth she tried so hard to bury. Coulson Marek kissed her. And it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't quick or unsure. It wasn't a move made out of wine and adrenaline. It was deliberate, quiet, and steady, like he needed to feel her to remember he was alive. It happened at the rooftop bar his leadership team used for private celebrations. They'd just landed the Hastings contract, a $1 million win that secured Marek and Company as the top agency in the Northeast. Everyone was there, champagne flowing, laughter echoing. Coulson, as usual, stayed a few steps removed, and Alexis, always half present, had drifted to the railing, watching the glitter of traffic lights far below. He walked up beside her and said nothing, just stood there with her, their shoulders barely touching. Then, quietly, he said, "You're not like the rest of them." She didn't turn to him. "That's supposed to be a compliment?" "It is." Alexis finally looked at him. His face was softer, not smiling, but unguarded. There was a weariness in his eyes, but not from stress, from restraint. "I don't usually do this," he said. "Do what?" "This. Let things happen." She could feel her breath shift. "You make a habit of kissing your employees on rooftops?" "No," he said. "I've never kissed anyone I work with." Then he reached up, slowly, letting his hand hover for a moment. She didn't move. His fingers touched her jaw. And then he kissed her. It was soft, but sure. No hesitation. No pretense. When they pulled apart, Alexis whispered, "We shouldn't." He nodded once. "I know." But neither of them walked away. That kiss became a crack in the wall neither of them tried to patch. The next morning, Alexis came into work 30 minutes earlier than usual. She took the stairs instead of the elevator. She didn't want anyone to think something had changed. But something had. Because when Coulson walked past her desk, he paused. Not for long. Just enough to glance at her. To acknowledge the tension without addressing it. They didn't talk about it all day. But that night, he asked her to stay late. They went over a quarterly pitch deck that didn't need urgent review. They ordered Chinese takeout. They sat across from each other, trading bites and ideas. At one point, he reached for a napkin. So did she. Their hands touched again. Neither pulled away. 3 nights later, she found herself in the back seat of his car, heading uptown. His penthouse was cold at first, all sharp corners and floor-to-ceiling windows. A city made of silence. But then he poured her a glass of wine, played Coltrane in the background. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to prove herself. They didn't fall into bed that night. Instead, she sat on his couch in one of his white dress shirts while they watched a documentary about branding psychology. He let her talk through every idea she had, asked questions, listened without interrupting. When she fell asleep mid-sentence, he didn't wake her. She woke the next morning with a blanket around her and a note that read, "There's coffee in the kitchen. Didn't want to wake you." See, it became a rhythm. Late nights, quiet glances, finger grazes that lingered a second too long. Some nights, she stayed at the penthouse. Others, he walked her to her Uber and waited until the car pulled off. They never defined it. No talk of titles, no expectations, but it was more than casual. There were moments, like the night he told her he hated Christmas because his mother used to spend the whole day drunk and crying about her failed life, or the time she showed him an old photo of her and her mother at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. He studied the picture and said, "You have her eyes, but yours see more." Or the evening she came down with a bad headache, and he cancelled a dinner with investors just to bring her ginger tea and Advil. But in the office, everything stayed the same. Professional, clean, quiet. He didn't touch her, didn't look at her too long. Only once did he break protocol. They were standing outside a client's office, waiting for a meeting to start. The hallway was empty. He leaned in and whispered, "You smell like cinnamon." She raised a brow. "That's oddly specific. I like cinnamon." She didn't respond, but she did smile. At one point, Alexis found herself staring at a blank Google Doc in her apartment, trying to write a journal entry. But every sentence felt dishonest. She wasn't sure if she was falling for him, or falling into him. There was a difference. He made her feel seen, but not always safe. He made her feel wanted, but never claimed. And part of her was scared to ask where it was going. Because if she asked, it might end, so she didn't ask. And he didn't offer. And for 3 fragile, beautiful weeks, they existed in a space that felt stolen from the real world. The days began to blur. Sometimes she woke up in his bed with sunlight warming her skin and the distant hum of the city below. Other times, she left before sunrise, slipping into a car with her blazer in one hand and her heels in the other, trying to beat the clock before the office came alive. There was no talk of love, no planning for the future, but there was comfort, there was trust, and in a strange way, there was freedom. Alexis didn't have to shrink herself. Coulson didn't try to fix her. They let each other be. No pressure, no masks. She started noticing the subtle ways he changed. He no longer stayed locked in his office during lunch. Sometimes he sat in the lounge, reading a book, sipping hot tea instead of his usual triple espresso. He once forwarded her an article about a branding agency in Chicago that doubled its value in 2 years. The subject line read, "Thought of you." He even complimented her during a meeting, not publicly, but afterward. "You were sharp in there," he said, brushing by her desk. Alexis looked up. "Thank you." His eyes lingered on her, a beat longer than they should have. Then he walked off. But underneath the growing connection, there was a quiet tension. Alexis started noticing the things they didn't talk about. He never asked where she saw herself in 5 years. Never talked about whether they'd continue this after the next quarter. Never mentioned how he explained her presence, her absence, to others. There were no promises, only proximity. And while part of her was content with that, another part began to ache, because she was starting to care, more than she expected, more than she wanted. One night, while curled up on his couch, she asked, "Do you believe in second chances?" He didn't look up from his book. "At work?" "No. In life. In relationships." He paused, then turned to her. "I believe people do what they're allowed to do. That's not the same as second chances." She said nothing. He didn't press, but that answer stuck with her. The next day at work, something felt off. She arrived to find Coulson already in a meeting. Unusual. His calendar had changed, and she hadn't been updated. Emails had been forwarded to someone else temporarily. Then she heard the name. Tasha. Alexis remembered her. A former assistant who had left the company last year after a minor scandal. She had returned, apparently, and HR hadn't told her. She pushed the thought aside, focused on her tasks, told herself not to spiral. But as the week went on, more red flags appeared. Tasha was suddenly looped in on Coulson's private briefings. She was sitting in on meetings Alexis usually ran. Then came Monday. It started like any other day. Alexis arrived early, got her usual coffee, reviewed the week's lineup. She walked into the office building with purpose, ready to handle what the week would throw. But when she turned the corner to her workspace, everything stopped. A woman, young, stylish, confident, was sitting at her desk. Alexis blinked. The woman looked up. "You must be Alexis." "That's my desk." "Oh. HR said you might stop by. I just started this morning." Alexis stood frozen. "Started as what?" "Executive assistant to Mr. Marek." Her ears rang. She walked away without saying another word, past the curious stares, past the assistants pretending not to watch. She moved like someone underwater, numb, slow, weightless. She reached the elevator. And then her phone buzzed. Subject, transition of role from hr@markandco.com. Dear Ms. Rowe, as part of our ongoing restructuring, your position has been eliminated effective immediately. Please find attached your severance package and next steps. We thank you for your service. That was it. No warning, no conversation, no decency. Coulson didn't call, didn't text, didn't even offer a glance. She looked back once, toward the hallway of corner offices, and saw his door closed. Of course it was. She carried the cardboard box HR had packed for her. 15 months of dedication, loyalty, quiet intimacy, and all it earned her was an exit no better than someone who'd forged expense reports. She didn't cry in the elevator. She waited until she got home, threw the box on her floor, and locked herself in the bathroom. She cried there, hard, not because she lost her job, but because she lost her dignity without even a goodbye. Alexis didn't reach out, and Coulson didn't try to find her. That silence told her everything she needed to know. He was never planning to keep her. She wasn't a partner. She was a placeholder. And she hated herself for believing, even for a second, that it could have been more. Ever trusted someone so deeply, only to be left without a word? Have you ever given your heart in silence, thinking you were both on the same page, until they vanished like nothing ever happened? Alexis didn't just lose a job. She lost a part of herself she thought was finally safe to give. And Coulson? He never even said goodbye. Would you forgive someone who cut you off without warning? No closure, no apology. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about silent betrayals. Like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for more emotional stories with real-life lessons. Alexis didn't tell anyone where she was going. She packed her life into 3 suitcases, closed her Manhattan lease, and bought a one-way train ticket to Chicago. No grand plan, no job waiting, no promises, just space and silence. The city felt colder than she remembered from her college visit years ago. Windy, wide, less polished than Manhattan, but more grounded. It didn't pretend to be glamorous. It didn't demand anything from her. That's what she needed. She rented a small one-bedroom in Hyde Park. Nothing fancy, the wallpaper peeled in corners, and the kitchen window got stuck every time she opened it. But it was hers. The neighbors minded their business. The streets were quieter. She could breathe again. For the first 2 weeks, she did nothing. Woke up, sat by the window, drank tea, slept again. Her laptop stayed closed, her resume untouched. The humiliation hadn't worn off yet. Worse than the firing was the way he vanished, like she hadn't mattered, like their long nights, stolen moments, and quiet smiles were just dust. Some nights she played Coltrane again, just to see if the memory still hurt. It did, but less each day. Eventually, survival kicked in. The little money in her savings wouldn't last forever. Rent was cheaper in Chicago, but nothing was free. So she did what she always had. She worked, not at an agency. Not under another CEO. She started small, freelance jobs, logo redesigns for local shops, marketing flyers for a friend's cousin's bakery, social media kits for small Etsy stores. She charged low rates at first, just to build up again, to stay busy, to not think about Colson Marek. But over time the projects got bigger. A wedding planner referred her to a boutique clothing line. A blogger asked her to brand her new podcast. A yoga studio wanted a full rebrand. Her inbox filled faster. Her confidence returned slower. 3 months in, Alexis registered her business name, AR Concepts. She didn't rent an office. She worked from her small living room with her dog Luna curled at her feet and playlists humming in the background. She bought a second-hand desk, hung up a whiteboard, and mapped out her clients with colored sticky notes. Her mother called one afternoon and asked, "Are you happy?" Alexis paused. "Not yet. But I'm not broken anymore either." There was something about being in control again. Her time was her own. Her ideas were respected. There was no power imbalance, no unspoken boundaries to tiptoe around, and no man waiting to pull the rug out from under her. Alexis kept her world small. She stopped following New York news. She deleted the number she never used, but couldn't stop staring at. She let herself sleep in when needed, cook when she had energy, rest when she didn't, and little by little, she healed. Still, every once in a while, she wondered, did he even care? Did he think about her? Did he ever regret what he did? One Friday night, she found herself standing at the window again, a glass of red wine in hand. The city lights below flickered through the fog, soft and distant. Luna snoozed at her feet. She hadn't thought about Colson in weeks, not seriously, but tonight the memory came back. Not sharp like before, not angry. Just present. She remembered the way he paused before saying her name, the way he'd stare out of windows like he was chasing something invisible, the way he held her face the night he kissed her like she was too delicate for the world he lived in. She didn't miss him. She missed who she thought he could have been. But that version never showed up. On Monday morning, she opened her inbox and nearly dropped her coffee. Subject line, nomination, Rising Brandmaker of the Year, Chicago chapter. She read it twice. Then again. It was real. The Regional Entrepreneurship Summit had shortlisted her for an award recognizing new business founders under 35. Someone had nominated her. And not just anyone. A client from 3 months ago, the wedding planner. Apparently she'd submitted Alexis's branding work alongside a nomination. Alexis stared at the screen in silence. A year ago she was cleaning out her desk in tears. Now? Someone saw her, respected her, celebrated her. The event was in 3 weeks. Formal attire, guest list of top executives, media coverage, exposure she wasn't sure she was ready for, but wasn't willing to turn down. She bought a forest green suit, simple, fitted, confident. No frills, no apology. She stood in front of the mirror the night before and didn't recognize herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked whole. For the first time in a long time, Alexis felt like her future wasn't tied to anyone's shadow. Not Colson's, not anyone's, just hers. The night of the summit arrived, and the ballroom sparkled with the kind of quiet power that didn't need to shout. No red carpets, no flashing lights, just sharp suits, statement heels, and conversations that built companies. Alexis walked in alone. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't trying to impress. She was simply showing up, as herself. The room buzzed with introductions and cocktail glasses clinking. Tables were dressed in silver and white, a small branded gift placed at every seat. Spotlights warmed the main stage, and a string quartet played in the corner, soft and rich. Alexis scanned the crowd. She didn't know many people here, and that was okay. She wasn't here to belong. She was here because she earned it. The evening moved quickly. Appetizers, opening remarks, small talk with a business owner from Milwaukee who loved her website design. A young woman asked if she was the Alexis Rowe who branded the new podcast Mothers Who Build. Alexis smiled. Yes, that's me. It was surreal. People knew her work, not because of Coulson, not because of some title attached to a man, because of her. Halfway through dinner, a woman from the event team tapped her shoulder. "You're up next." Alexis blinked. "I thought I wasn't winning anything. Just a finalist. There's a short spotlight moment for each nominee. You'll say a few words." She nodded, heart steady. When her name was called, the audience applauded politely. She stepped onto the stage, heels silent on the polished floor, the forest green of her suit catching under the lights. She looked out over the crowd and took a deep breath. Then she spoke. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she began. "Not in this room. Not on this stage." Pause. "When I left New York a year ago, I didn't come to start a business. I came to disappear. But life has a strange way of showing us what we're capable of when the noise is gone." Soft murmurs. She continued. AR Concepts wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born on a second-hand desk in a tiny apartment with a dog who sat through every client call like she was on payroll. The crowd chuckled gently, but, most importantly, it was built after betrayal. She let that sit for a moment. Sometimes the people we trust most don't just walk away. They erase us. And when that happens, you can either fold or rebuild. Applause swelled. I chose to rebuild, not to prove anything, but to remember who I was before I let someone else's silence define my worth. A pause. Then she smiled. "So thank you, not for the nomination, but for the reminder that beginnings often come after the endings we never asked for." The applause that followed wasn't polite this time. It was real. Warm, lasting. She walked off stage calm, clear-headed, and stronger than she'd felt in years. But the warmth in her chest turned ice-cold the moment she returned to her seat. There, at the edge of the ballroom, near the side entrance, stood Coulson Marek. His frame was unmistakable. Tailored navy suit, no tie. Hands in his pockets, and eyes locked on her like he hadn't seen light in weeks. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. For a second, the applause disappeared. The room melted. The spotlight faded. It was just him, looking at her like he'd finally remembered something precious he lost. He didn't approach her, didn't make a scene. He stayed in the shadows, still and unreadable. She turned away, sat down, focused on her water glass. The host read the next name, but Alexis didn't hear it. All she could hear was the question screaming in her mind, "Why now?" The event ended. The lights dimmed. People filtered out, buzzing with congratulations and business card swaps. Alexis waited. She wanted to see if he'd leave. But when she stepped outside, her answer was already waiting. The hotel receptionist handed her a handwritten note. "Alexis, I know I don't deserve 10 seconds of your time, but I owe you something real. Just 10 minutes. Please, Coulson." She read it twice, then folded it into her purse. She didn't know if she was ready to see him again, but she knew one thing for sure. The version of Alexis who stood on that stage, she didn't need closure. She'd earned the right to choose what came next. Alexis didn't go straight to her room after the summit. She stood outside the hotel for almost 20 minutes, the city buzzing behind her, the letter from Coulson still folded inside her purse like a weight she couldn't name. "Just 10 minutes, he wrote. She thought about tearing it up, letting it fall into the storm drain and telling herself he was 10 minutes too late. But something in her chest tugged, not because she wanted him back, but because she wanted to know if the man who left her so easily could face what he did. So she crossed the street, walked into the cafe across from the hotel lobby, and found him sitting at a table in the far corner, alone, nursing a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. He stood when he saw her, didn't speak, didn't smile, just waited. Alexis sat. 10 minutes, she said flatly. He nodded. I won't waste them. She studied him. He looked thinner, not unwell, just tired. His tie was gone. Shirt sleeves rolled. There was stubble on his jaw and something quieter behind his eyes. Not the hard CEO she remembered. Not the guarded man she used to undress with her eyes and share silence with on rooftops. This version looked human. Why are you here? She asked. Coulson looked down, then met her gaze again. Because I haven't known peace since the day you left. Since you replaced me, you mean? He nodded slowly. Yes, that. She folded her arms. You didn't even tell me. You let me walk into my own erasure. I did. Her eyes narrowed. So why now? Why come all this way? Coulson leaned forward. Because I've spent 2 years pretending I didn't care. That I could compartmentalize what we were and what I did. But watching you on that stage tonight, he exhaled. You looked whole, like someone who didn't just rebuild, someone who rose. And I realized I never said the one thing that mattered most. Alexis didn't blink. Which is, I'm sorry. The silence between them stretched. For a long moment, Alexis said nothing. Then, finally, she asked, why didn't you say it then? Coulson lowered his eyes. Because I thought it would make it worse. That I'd confuse you more. That if I faced you, I'd see how badly I messed up. And I couldn't handle that. She shook her head. You don't get to frame your silence as protection. I know. You ended it without a word. You replaced me while we were... I didn't plan to, he interrupted gently. The board was watching me. HR flagged our closeness. I panicked. I thought if I put space between us it would fix everything. Keep the company clean. He swallowed. But I forgot one thing. What's that? You weren't the mess I needed to fix. You were the only part of my life that made sense. Alexis looked away. She wasn't crying, but her throat burned. You don't get to say that now, she whispered. Not after how you made me feel, like I didn't matter, like everything we shared was disposable. I know. He was quiet for a beat. Then he added, but you did matter. You still do. And I'll carry what I did for the rest of my life. She met his gaze. Then carry it. Don't hand it back to me expecting a ribbon. Coulson nodded. You're not here to fix this, she continued. You're here for clarity. So let me give it to you. He sat straighter. You broke me. He winced. But I'm not broken now. And you don't get to claim the version of me that rebuilt herself. I'm not asking to, he said softly. I just want you to know, I see it. All of it. I see you. Alexis stood. That's your 10 minutes. Coulson rose slowly. Will I ever see you again? She tilted her head. That's not up to you. Then, before walking away, she leaned in close and whispered, if you ever want to be in my life again, show up different. Not as a CEO, not as a man with regrets, but as someone who doesn't run. She turned and left. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. Some things deserved to stay in the past. Others had to prove they belonged in the future. Alexis didn't hear from Coulson for weeks. Not a text, not a call, not a shadow in the corner of an event. And that was fine with her. She wasn't waiting. Instead, she poured herself back into her work. A new client came on, a non-profit for underserved youth. The project was meaningful, the kind of story-driven branding she loved. The founder said she'd been referred by 3 other people. Alexis smiled at that. She was becoming the person people whispered about in the right rooms. Not because of who she dated, because of who she became. On the 3rd Friday after the summit, she stopped by a cafe in Bronzeville for her usual order. Chamomile tea, light honey, no lid. She didn't think much of it when the barista handed it over with a smile and said, "The gentleman already paid." She turned to ask who, But before she could, she saw him. Coulson, standing by the window in a wool coat, holding his own tea, expression unreadable. This time, she didn't walk away. They sat outside. It was too cold, but neither of them complained. Alexis held the cup with both hands, watching steam curl toward the sky. "You remembered the tea," she said. "I remember everything," he replied. She glanced sideways. "I thought I was clear. You weren't supposed to show up again unless you were different." "I'm not the same man," he said. "But I'm not here to convince you of that." She stayed quiet. He continued. "I didn't text or call after the summit. I thought you needed space, and I needed to earn the right to even be in the same room as you again." Alexis turned toward him. "Then why now?" He smiled faintly. "Because I've been showing up. Just not where you could see me." Her brow furrowed. "I watched your webinar on creative clarity. I subscribed to your newsletter. I referred 2 clients anonymously under a shell LLC I use." She stared at him. "You what?" "I didn't want credit. I just wanted to support your work. The right way, quietly, without expecting anything." She didn't know what to say, so he filled the silence. "I've been going to therapy, twice a week. I've stepped down from the daily operations of American company. I hired a new COO. I'm still the owner, but not the operator." Alexis blinked. "You stepped down?" He nodded. "It was time. I was addicted to control. And it cost me you." The honesty in his voice was unsettling. It wasn't performative. It wasn't polished. It was real. Still, she wasn't rushing. "I'm not interested in pity," she said, "or dramatic gestures. I know. I don't want to be flattered. I want to be respected, understood, known." "I want that too," he said. They both sipped their tea. A long moment passed. Then Alexis looked at him and asked, "What do you want, Coulson?" He didn't hesitate. "I want to be someone you trust, even if that means never being more than a person you drink tea with on Fridays." She stared at him. That wasn't the answer she expected. But maybe... That was the point. A week later, it happened again. Friday afternoon, same cafe, same order, same 2 people sitting outside talking about everything but the past. Movies, books, a funny client story, Luna's new chew toy obsession. There were no long glances, no heavy silence, just calm. Alexis didn't know what they were rebuilding. She didn't even know if they were rebuilding anything. But she knew one thing. Coulson was showing up. And for now, that was enough. They started meeting every Friday. At first, it was always the same cafe, always the same order, always the same 2 people sitting at the same table outside, even when the cold made Alexis wrap her coat tighter and Coulson's hands went numb gripping his cup. But it became more than tea. It became routine. It became steady. And for Alexis, that steadiness was what she respected most. Coulson didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring apologies. He didn't try to charm his way back into her life. He showed up, on time, every week. He didn't talk about what they had. He talked about what was her business, her client wins, her frustrations with scope creep, her dog's recent decision to eat half a shoe. Coulson listened, not like before, when he was assessing or deciding how much of himself to show. This time, he was just present. One Friday, it rained, not heavy, but enough to keep the outdoor seating closed. Alexis expected a cancellation text, but when she walked in, Coulson was already there, inside, by the window. 2 teas on the table. He stood when she entered. "Didn't want to assume you'd come. I didn't want to assume you'd remember." They both smiled. Small, quiet, but real. That day, for the first time, she asked him a personal question. "What do your weekends look like now?" He shrugged. "Less email, more reading." "I'm learning to cook." She raised an eyebrow. "Cook?" "Trying. Not good at it yet." What's your best dish? Scrambled eggs I didn't burn. She chuckled softly. You laugh, he said. But I didn't know what a whisk was until last month. That made her laugh louder. It felt natural, and it didn't scare her, not anymore. Over time, their conversations deepened. He told her about the last time he saw his mother and how he left the room without hugging her, something he still regrets. She shared the moment in college when she almost dropped out, sitting in a public library, crying over a final project that erased 3 months of work after her laptop crashed. He listened without trying to fix it. She spoke without needing to impress him. Then came the moment that shifted everything again. A random Tuesday. She was walking Luna around her block when it started snowing. Flakes came heavy, sudden, thick. She rushed to get back to her apartment when her phone buzzed. Coulson, are you home safe? Snow's intense near the lake. Alexis paused. He hadn't asked something like that before. She typed back, Alexis. Almost? You watching the weather for all your tea buddies now? Coulson, no. Just the one whose laugh still echoes in my head. She didn't answer, not because it scared her, because it was honest, and she didn't know what to do with honest from him anymore. That Friday, they didn't meet at the cafe. He invited her to his new place. Not the old penthouse. He had moved, sold it months ago. Now, he lived in a quiet condo on the edge of Lincoln Park. Smaller, more lived in, less showroom. When she arrived, he opened the door wearing jeans, barefoot, a bandage on one finger. I told you I was learning to cook. What happened? Avocado fought back. She laughed as she stepped inside. His space was warm, books on shelves, throw blankets, framed black and white photography. None of it screamed CEO. All of it whispered man trying. He handed her tea. Chamomile. Always. They sat on the floor, back against the couch, Luna curled next to them. He didn't reach for her. She didn't move closer. But she asked, do you miss it? The company? He thought for a moment. I miss the version of it I thought made me important. But I don't miss who I was in that office. She looked at him carefully. Who are you now? He didn't rush the answer. Someone I'm still figuring out. But someone I hope is worthy of real peace, not power. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't even touch. But when she left, he walked her to the door and said, thank you for not slamming it the second I knocked. She stared at him, and before stepping out into the snow, she said, I didn't open it for you. I opened it for me. Alexis didn't tell anyone about the Friday visits. Not her clients. Not her old roommate. Not even her mother. It wasn't a secret. But it wasn't something she was ready to explain. Not when she was still figuring out what it meant herself. They weren't dating. They weren't rebuilding the past. They were just two people meeting once a week. Talking like old friends who hadn't decided yet if they could become something again. And maybe that was enough. For now. Some Fridays passed quietly. They didn't always meet. Sometimes she texted, busy today, rain check? He never pushed, never made her feel guilty. He'd reply, of course, same time next week? And he'd be there, always. It was the consistency she never got from him back then. And that shift, that growth, was what softened her edges the most. He wasn't chasing forgiveness. He was showing change. And that spoke louder than anything he could say. One evening, Alexis got a message from a client she had wanted for months. A national cosmetics brand with a strong female founder, a bold mission, and a huge audience. They wanted a pitch. In person. In New York. She hesitated. Chicago was her fresh start. Going back to Manhattan meant walking the same streets where she'd once cried silently. In an elevator, carrying a cardboard box filled with severance and silence. But this opportunity was too big to pass up. So, she booked the flight. 2 nights before she left, she met Coulson at the cafe. He noticed something different in her posture. Straight, but tense. You okay? He asked, as she stirred her tea absent-mindedly. I have a pitch in New York next week. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "You nervous?" She nodded. "Not about the pitch." He understood instantly. She didn't need to explain. "I'll be in town for something next week too," he said. "But if you want space, I won't be anywhere near your pitch. Promise." Alexis blinked. "You'd do that?" He nodded. "You don't need me in your shadow. Not anymore." She looked down at her tea, then back up. "I wouldn't mind if you were in the audience." Quietly, a pause. He smiled. "I'll wear something that doesn't distract." New York didn't feel the same. It didn't hurt. It didn't haunt. It just existed, like an old version of her that she'd long outgrown. Alexis walked into the presentation room in a tailored navy jumpsuit and deep red heels. Confident. Clear. Coulson sat near the back. No laptop, no phone, just eyes on her. She didn't focus on him, though. She focused on her ideas, her work, her value. And when the pitch ended, the founder walked over and said, "That was the most authentic branding presentation I've ever seen." Alexis smiled. It wasn't because of Coulson. It was because of herself. After the event, she found him near the exit. "I didn't get in the way, did I?" He asked. "You didn't even blink during my slides. Too afraid I'd miss something." Then, in a rare moment of warmth, she stepped closer and adjusted the sleeve of his jacket. "You looked proud," she said. "I am proud." That night, they didn't say goodbye like usual. They walked for a while, through streets that once held too many memories. This time, they made new ones. And for the first time in a long time, Alexis didn't feel like she was looking at someone she had to get over. She was looking at someone who, maybe, had finally earned the right to stand beside her again. Not as her past, but possibly her future. Alexis didn't call what they had a relationship, not because it wasn't becoming one, but because that word came with expectations, and expectations had once crushed her. Whatever this was, it was intentional. And that made it enough. Most weeks, Coulson still showed up at the cafe. Other weeks, they cooked at his condo. Slowly, he graduated from burnt eggs to roasted vegetables and baked salmon. Alexis didn't pretend to be impressed, but she cleaned her plate every time. One Saturday, he surprised her with a dog park pass for Luna. No note, no gesture, just left it on her table with a text. "Thought you two might enjoy this. If not, I'll happily walk her when you're swamped." She stared at it for a full minute before smiling quietly to herself. She didn't reply. She just added his name to the access list at her building. One afternoon, she came home from a client meeting to find Luna calmly, chewing her toy in the hallway, and Coulson asleep on her couch. There were folders on her coffee table, client printouts. He must have picked them up when she mentioned earlier she didn't have time. She stood there, staring at him. He didn't stir. His phone rested on his chest. Face up, unlocked. That alone was shocking. A man like him didn't sleep through anything, didn't let his guard down, didn't rest in someone else's space like it belonged to him. But here he was, breathing evenly, peacefully. No suit, no armor, just Coulson. She walked quietly to her kitchen and made tea. Let him sleep. Let herself feel, because something had shifted. He wasn't trying to get her back. He was trying to deserve whatever place she gave him. And he wasn't rushing. Neither was she. That night, they ate dinner in her apartment. Coulson cooked again. This time, a shrimp stir-fry that he confessed took 3 YouTube videos to get right. She teased him for forgetting to peel the shrimp. He told her she owed him at least 1 breakfast lesson. She agreed. Then, for the first time in a while, they sat on the couch, shoulder to shoulder. No space between. No hesitation. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. It was in the way their arms brushed, the way she leaned into him as the credits rolled, the way he didn't move, even when his phone buzzed with something important. He silenced it, and stayed right there. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. He turned to her, Anything. Why didn't you fight for me back then? Coulson didn't flinch. He took a slow breath, then answered, "Because I thought you deserved better than the man I was. And I was scared that if I tried, you'd see just how little I knew how to love someone right." Alexis looked down at her hands. "I would have stayed, you know," she whispered. "I know," he said, "and that's exactly why I wasn't ready." She didn't respond, but she reached for his hand, held it, not as a promise, but as proof that maybe, just maybe, he was becoming someone worth trusting again. Coulson didn't rush anything, not even when it was obvious they were no longer just sharing tea or catching up. Something between them had quietly shifted. They still didn't use the word together. There was no status, no labels. But now, there was presence. He came over with groceries before she asked. He helped her patch the leaky bathroom faucet, even though he'd never held a wrench right in his life. He learned how she liked her tea, how she hated loud chewing, how she always curled to the left when sleeping on the couch. And Alexis learned him too, how he tapped his thumb against his thigh when trying not to interrupt, how he stayed silent when overwhelmed, not out of anger, but fear of saying the wrong thing, how he looked at her, now, with admiration, not possession. That was new. That was earned. One evening, after dinner, they sat on her couch, watching a slow indie film neither of them cared about. Halfway through, she leaned her head against his shoulder. She didn't ask. He didn't flinch. He rested his cheek on her hair, and they stayed that way until the credits rolled. When she pulled back, she looked at him, really looked, and asked softly, "Are you afraid I'll leave again?" He took a breath. "I'm more afraid you'll realize you never needed me at all." Alexis held his gaze. "I didn't. But that doesn't mean I don't want you here." Those words settled between them like a peace offering. He didn't reply with a speech. He just took her hand and kissed her knuckles, slowly, like it meant something. Because it did. Later that night, she stood in the kitchen rinsing mugs. He walked up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and didn't say a word. She closed her eyes, let her body lean into his, and for the first time since Manhattan, she allowed herself to feel safe again. That weekend, she invited him to a local community event, something she would have never done before. It wasn't fancy, just a small pop-up fair featuring black-owned businesses, artists, and food trucks. He wore jeans and sneakers, didn't bring anyone with him, didn't correct people when they called him Alexis's guy. She watched him shake hands with a local candle maker and buy 3 jars of lavender and citrus. Blend, even though he later whispered to her that he didn't know what to do with candles. He was trying. That meant more to her than she could say. The next day, he asked if she'd be okay with him attending her upcoming branding workshop. As a guest, not as support. Just to learn. "I don't want to build anything new," he said, "but I want to understand the world you've created. You built something that feels honest. I want to sit in it, quietly." Alexis stared at him. This was the same man who once replaced her without a conversation, and now he was asking for a seat, not a spotlight. "Yeah," she said. "You can come." He nodded, didn't smile, but his shoulders eased. That Friday, they didn't go to the cafe. They stayed in. They cooked together, badly. Luna barked at the smoke alarm when Coulson dropped the oven temp too low, and Alexis nearly burned the sauce while laughing too hard. Afterward, they danced to an old Erykah Badu track, slow and lazy in the middle of the kitchen. She stood on his toes like she used to as a kid with her uncle, swaying with no rhythm, humming softly against his chest. He didn't ask to kiss her. She didn't ask if it was time. But when it happened, slow, deep, sure, it felt like everything they hadn't said, finally, had a voice. It wasn't about forgiveness, or even love. It was about presence, trust, respect. It was about showing up, not just saying the right thing. And this time, Coulson wasn't reaching for the version of Alexis who stayed quiet to be loved. He was holding the woman who rebuilt herself with no blueprint, and who chose, on her own terms, to let him close again. What does it take to truly earn a second chance? Have you ever watched someone walk back into your life, not with promises, but with quiet consistency? Alexis didn't fall in love again overnight. She let trust return slowly, not through words, but through presence, through effort, through healing on her own first. Would you give someone another chance if they showed up differently? And never asked for forgiveness, just the space to grow beside you. Drop your thoughts in the comments, like if you believe redemption starts with accountability. Share this episode with someone who understands what it means to rebuild. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories, where every story reminds you that growth is possible. And love, when earned, is even better the second time. It wasn't the kiss that changed things. It was everything after. Because Coulson didn't lean into comfort. He didn't ask what they were now. Didn't press for definitions. Didn't try to fill the silence with promises he couldn't keep. He just stayed present, and Alexis kept letting him in, quietly, thoughtfully, day by day. They started spending more time in the same space. He worked from her kitchen counter some days, headphones on, dog at his feet. She took meetings on the balcony, sipping tea while overlooking the city that used to feel too big. Now, it just felt hers. And somehow, she realized, Coulson didn't take up space like before. He adapted to hers. And that mattered. One night, while folding laundry, she asked without thinking, "What's something you never told anyone?" He didn't hesitate. "My biggest fear isn't failure," he said. "It's being known," and then left. She paused mid-fold. He added, "When you walked away, it wasn't just painful. It was loud. It proved that even someone who saw me, really saw me, could still decide I wasn't worth the fight." Alexis sat beside him, and for a long time, said nothing. Then, "I didn't leave because you were unworthy. I left because you chose silence when I needed truth." He looked at her. "Do you still need truth?" She nodded. "Always." He took her hand and whispered, "Then I'll keep showing up in it." They didn't call what they had a relationship, but they also didn't call it friendship anymore. It was a slow burn, warm, not rushed, like sunlight through a window instead of fireworks at midnight. One Saturday morning, Alexis brought him to the community center where she'd been consulting pro bono on a visual rebrand. She introduced him to the teenage girls in the youth mentorship program. "This is Coulson," she said. "He used to run a major firm in New York, but now he's learning how not to answer emails during dinner." The girls laughed. He smiled. Afterward, he helped move boxes, passed out flyers, and bought everyone pizza without saying a word about it. Alexis watched him from across the room, kneeling beside a seventh grader who wanted help with her poster design, and she felt something settle deep in her chest. Not butterflies, not electricity, something steadier, like a knowing. That night she found him in her kitchen, cleaning up dinner. She stood in the doorway, arms folded. "You've changed," she said. He turned. "Enough?" "That's not for me to say," he nodded. "But I like who you are now," she added. He smiled. "Me too." Later, while she curled on the couch with Luna and a half-read book, Coulson sat at her desk, flipping through one of her pitch books. "I still think you're the best creative mind I've ever worked with," he said. She smirked. "And yet, you still hired Tasha over me." He looked up. That was fear, not strategy. "Alexis, let that sit." Then, "Are you afraid now?" He closed the book. "Yes, but not of losing you." She looked over. "I'm afraid of wasting what we could have, if I don't keep choosing you the right way." She didn't respond with a grand gesture. She just reached out, held his hand. And for the rest of the evening, they didn't say another word. Because some love stories don't need to be shouted. They just need to be lived. A week later, Alexis launched her biggest client campaign yet, a full-scale branding rollout for a women-led fintech startup with national backing. She'd worked quietly for months on the design strategy, the messaging, the rollout timeline. When it went live, the reception was explosive. Mentions on business blogs, praise on LinkedIn. New inquiries filling her inbox faster than she could flag them. For the first time since leaving New York, Alexis felt professionally seen. Not because of where she worked or who she dated, but because of what she created. Coulson was the first person she told. He didn't say congratulations. He said, of course they loved it. You tell stories that people don't realize they've been waiting to hear. She smiled, her chest warming at the compliment. But what struck her most was how calmly he said it. No show, no praise-seeking, just truth. Then he asked, what do you want to do next? Not, what will you do next? What do you want? It caught her off guard, because for so long, Alexis's story had been about survival, about movement, about picking herself up and proving she could. But want, that was something she rarely let herself feel. She thought for a moment, then answered, I want to build something that helps other women like me, women who walked away, even when it cost them everything. He leaned forward. Then let's figure out how to make that real. She stared at him. You mean you want in? He shook his head. I mean, I want to support you, from wherever you need me. And she believed him, not because of the words, because he didn't ask to be at the center. He offered to be in the background, holding the scaffolding steady. A few nights later, Alexis hosted a small gathering at her apartment, just close friends and a few clients. Nothing formal. No se ruega contestar, just people who mattered. Coulson helped hang the lights on her balcony, burn sage in the corners, and organize the wine. When one of the guests asked who he was, he replied, a friend of the host, hoping to stay in her good graces. Alexis overheard it. She didn't correct him. But later, when they were alone on the balcony, she touched his hand and said quietly, You've stayed longer than anyone ever has, even when I didn't ask you to. He looked at her, serious now. Because I never wanted anything temporary with you. She stepped closer. Their foreheads touched. And for the first time in years, Alexis felt like she wasn't guarding her heart. She was sharing it. That night, they made love for the first time since New York. No rush, no tension, just steady, honest connection. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It was real. And that was everything. The next morning, Alexis woke to sunlight and silence. Coulson was still there, in her kitchen, making breakfast, wearing her CEO of My Life apron. She stood in the doorway, arms folded, smiling. He looked over, spatula in hand. You're laughing at me, aren't you? A little? You should know I'm dangerously close to burning these eggs. You mean your specialty? Exactly. She crossed the room and kissed him on the cheek. Just don't burn us, she said softly. He turned, meeting her eyes. I won't, he said. Not this time. They didn't talk about what happened that night. Not right away. There were no awkward conversations the next morning. No fumbling for definitions or trying to name a feeling too new to be boxed. Instead, they moved through the day gently. He left after breakfast with a kiss to her temple and a promise to call before his flight to DC. She spent the day replying to new client inquiries and walking Luna along the lakefront. Every now and then she'd reach for her phone, then stop. There was nothing to check. She wasn't waiting for him to prove something anymore. He already was. Every day he showed up without needing applause. Every day he stood beside her without needing to be front and center. That night, he texted her a photo of his hotel room's terrible room service sandwich with a caption, "They put mustard on both sides. I miss Chicago already." She smiled to herself and replied, "Should have stayed for leftover stir-fry." Luna ate half the rice. She's spoiled. She learned from the best. No kiss emojis. No heart. Just rhythm. Simple, steady rhythm. And for Alexis, that rhythm was sacred. The next week was full. She landed a new partnership with a wellness startup, helped host a virtual panel on authenticity in branding, took Luna to the vet, cooked more than usual. Coulson called every night, not to check in, just to talk about the articles he read. About the founder who cried during her keynote and how he didn't know how to respond. About his dad, who still didn't know he had stepped down as CEO. About how strange it felt to be quiet and how much peace it brought him now. Then came Friday. It had become their day again, but this time he texted first. "Still good for tea? Or want to skip today?" She replied, "You don't have to keep pretending it's just about tea." A beat later. Then, "I'd like to come over. I miss you." She didn't type for a moment. Then, "Bring extra honey. I'm out." That night, he showed up with honey, a bottle of wine, and a small plant in a blue pot. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the green thing in his hand. "It's a peace lily. You said your windowsill looked empty." She took it from him gently. "It's pretty. It's hard to kill. Perfect." They both laughed. Then, softly, Alexis added, "Thank you for remembering." "I remember everything," he said. They didn't kiss when he walked in. They didn't need to. Instead, they cooked, watched a film, fell asleep mid-conversation on the couch. When she woke up hours later, still curled against him, his arm wrapped around her waist, he was already awake, watching her, not possessive, not needy, just present. And in that moment, Alexis knew. This wasn't a man trying to earn her back. This was a man who had finally arrived, not in her life, in his own. By mid-fall, Chicago was colder, but their rhythm stayed warm. Fridays at her place became a habit neither of them questioned anymore. Sometimes they ordered in. Other times he cooked while she worked, humming quietly in the background while her laptop clicked and buzzed through campaigns. They still didn't call it love. Alexis wasn't ready for the word. Not because she feared it, because she respected it. Love wasn't what they had before. What they had back then was need, escape, infatuation. This was earned, one moment at a time. That weekend, Alexis invited Coulson to join her and Luna at a weekend market along the lakefront. Local artists, music, handmade jewelry, kids running in circles. He kept a respectful distance, not pushing for hand-holding, not angling for attention. But when one of the vendors asked if they were married, Alexis didn't flinch. She just smiled and said, "Not yet." Coulson raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "I didn't say no," she whispered later as they walked between booths. He chuckled softly. "No, you didn't." That night, they sat on the floor of her apartment, eating cinnamon rolls out of the paper bag they came in. "Do you ever think about New York?" he asked suddenly. She took a bite. "Sometimes. Do you miss it?" "No," she said. Then, after a pause, "I miss who I wanted to be there, but not who I was." He nodded, looking at the crumbs between them. "I miss the version of me I pretended to be," he admitted. She tilted her head. "The perfect CEO?" He shook his head. "The man who thought perfection was safer than truth." She leaned back on her hands, looking at him in the soft lamplight. "You're better now," she said. He met her eyes. "Because I finally had to face what mattered. Which is you. And who you became after I failed you." There it was. That honesty again. So simple. So unforced. She wasn't waiting for apologies anymore. She was living in proof. He saw her. He chose her. Without needing to own her. Later, as they lay on the couch with Luna snoring softly at their feet, Coulson asked, "What scares you now?" Alexis thought for a long moment. "Letting myself be loved, and realizing I deserve it." He turned his head toward her. "You always did." She didn't respond with words. She just tucked her head under his chin and whispered, "Don't forget that next time you want to disappear." "I won't," he said, voice thick. "Not from you. Not again." That night, there was no grand gesture, no long speeches, just quiet. A couch. Two people resting inside something they once broke and slowly rebuilt. With nothing but time, truth, and the willingness to stay when it got hard. Alexis sat at her desk on a quiet Thursday morning, sipping her tea when, An email popped up with a subject line that made her blink twice. Featured founder interview request, Forbes Women. She clicked. Reread. They wanted her. Not Marek and Company. Not a collaboration. Just her. A full feature on her business journey, her rebrand philosophy, and her personal transformation. From Manhattan executive assistant to leading voice in ethical, women-led branding. At the bottom of the message, we've followed your work since the Pivot Project. Your story is powerful. We'd love to highlight it. She sat back, stared at the screen. This wasn't a small blog or podcast panel. This was national. She'd built something real, and the world had started to notice. Coulson called that afternoon, like he always did when she sent him her end-of-week client tracker. "Everything okay?" he asked, catching the shift in her voice after a few sentences. She smiled faintly. "You tell me. Does my voice sound like someone who just got an interview request from Forbes?" A pause. Then, "What?" "I'm serious. They want to feature AR concepts. They said it's part of a new spotlight on women redefining modern branding." He didn't scream, didn't cheer, but the joy in his silence said everything. Then, quietly, "You deserve that. All of it. Would you come with me?" she asked before thinking. "To the taping?" Another pause. Then, "Yes." "As what, though?" She looked out the window, her reflection faint against the city behind the glass. "As my person." The taping was scheduled in New York, of course. But this time, Alexis didn't flinch. She booked 2 tickets, found a boutique hotel in Soho, and packed the emerald blazer Coulson once said made her look like someone who owns empires and still remembers your coffee order. He booked the flights. She handled the rest. They didn't overthink it. They just went. The studio was warm, lit softly. Comfortable couches instead of stiff chairs. The producer greeted her by name and said, "We're so glad you said yes." Coulson sat quietly in the corner, just behind the lights, not visible on camera, but close enough to make her feel steady. The host opened with a question. "Tell us what heartbreak taught you about building something that lasts." Alexis smiled, not because it was funny, but because she finally had the answer. "Heartbreak," she began, "teaches you to slow down, to stop waiting for permission, to see yourself clearly, flaws and all, and decide you're still worth betting on." She let that sit. "AR Concepts wasn't built to prove anyone wrong. It was built to remember who I was before I started shrinking." Afterward, they walked through Central Park. No rush, no paparazzi, just her hand in his. She didn't need his validation anymore. And that's why it felt so good to have it. That night, back in the hotel, they lay across the bed facing each other. Coulson asked softly, "When did you know you were ready to let me try again?" Alexis traced the seam of the pillowcase with one finger. "When you stopped trying to explain who you were and just started being who I needed." He nodded, quiet. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Us?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I regret who we were before, not who we are now." He reached across the space between them. She met him halfway. The next morning, Alexis woke before the sun. She moved quietly through the hotel suite, not wanting to disturb Coulson. He was still asleep, one arm across her side of the bed, peaceful in a way that reminded her how far they'd both come. She stepped out onto the balcony in her robe, tea in hand, the early Manhattan skyline still wrapped in shades of blue and grey. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the city's weight pressing on her. She stood above it, not because she conquered it, but because it no longer defined her. She'd left as someone who had been dismissed. She returned as someone remembered, not because of revenge, not because of a comeback, because she stayed true to who she was, after everything. Coulson stirred an hour later, blinking into the morning light. She brought him tea. "You didn't have to do this," he mumbled sleepily. "I wanted to." He took it, looked at her. "You're different here." Alexis sat beside him. "How so?" He studied her face, like he was cataloguing every part of her. "You're lighter, but sharper. It's like you know exactly what parts of yourself to protect now. She smiled. Maybe I do. They checked out later that afternoon. Coulson had meetings back in Chicago, but they flew back together. On the plane, Alexis leaned against him as he scrolled through photos from the taping. One shot stopped her. It was her, sitting tall on the interview set, speaking mid-sentence, hands expressive, eyes focused. She barely recognized herself. I look like someone who's... Sure, she whispered. You are, he said. And you always were. You just stopped letting someone else rewrite your ending. She looked at him. Softly. Are we writing something now? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned fully toward her. No, he said. We're living it. Back in Chicago, Alexis received a call from one of the mentorship programs she'd worked with months earlier. They wanted her to help design a leadership and self-worth curriculum for girls ages 14 to 18. Something permanent. The kind of thing that lived beyond a campaign. She accepted, and told Coulson over dinner. His face lit up. Do you know what this means? He asked. She shrugged. Another project? He leaned in. No. Legacy. Later that night, he pulled her in as they stood on her balcony, the chill in the air sharp but not uncomfortable. I've been thinking, he said. About? You. He paused. Us. She didn't interrupt. I know we still haven't labeled this, and I haven't asked for anything more than what you're ready for. But if you ever do want more, I'd be proud to stand beside you. Publicly, privately, fully. Her heart didn't race. It settled, because love wasn't supposed to be a rush. It was supposed to be safe, steady, earned. And Coulson, now, was all three. I won't run again, he said. I know, she replied, and then she reached for his hand. Not because she was finally ready, but because she already was. 1 year after Alexis walked onto the Forbes Women interview stage, she stood behind another microphone, this time at a community auditorium in Bronzeville. But she wasn't alone. She was the keynote speaker for the Youth Branding and Leadership Summit she'd helped build from the ground up, Empower Her Rise, now a citywide initiative. Teen girls filled the seats in front of her, notebooks ready, eyes wide. Mothers, mentors, educators, all gathered to hear from the woman who once rebuilt her entire life from silence. Coulson sat near the back, next to Luna's dog-sitter, clapping the loudest when Alexis stepped forward. She adjusted the mic and smiled, not nervously, not politely, but fully. I used to believe you had to wait until someone gave you permission to take up space, she began. And I waited for years, hoping a title, a salary, or someone else's attention would make me worthy. She looked around the room. But the truth is, you don't need anyone to see you to be real. You already are. And you're allowed to start before you're ready, to walk away before it makes sense, to choose yourself, even when someone else refuses to. Murmurs of agreement. Soft claps, she finished. Everything I've built didn't come from being fearless. It came from being honest about what hurt, what healed, and what I still don't have answers for. And that's where your power lives. In telling the truth, and then living it. The crowd rose. Applause thundered. And somewhere in the back, Coulson wiped his eye and didn't even try to pretend it was dust. After the event, they walked through the park quietly. Alexis kicked off her heels, holding them in one hand. Coulson handed her a smoothie. Strawberry banana. No protein powder this time. Finally, she smiled. They sat on a bench under a tree, watching the sun ease toward the horizon. He cleared his throat. She turned. And that's when she saw the small velvet box in his hand. Don't panic, he said gently, sensing her breath hitch. I'm not asking you to marry me today. I'm asking if you'd consider a forever that looks like this. Quiet mornings, real conversations, room to grow. No performance, just partnership. He opened the box. Inside was a gold band, simple, elegant, and hers. I don't want to be the man who once broke you, he said. I want to be the man who helps you rise, even higher. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. But she didn't cry. She smiled. "You already are." She reached out, closed the box gently, then placed it in her purse. "No yes, no no, just keep showing up like this, and I'll keep choosing you." Coulson nodded. No rush, no pressure, just peace. A few months later, they moved into a restored brownstone on South King Drive. Not a mansion, not a penthouse, but a home. It had light blue shutters, a little stoop with mismatched potted plants, and a breakfast nook that Alexis filled with books instead of bowls. The walls held no secrets here, no rooms to hide in, only laughter, slow jazz, Luna's wagging tail, and the occasional burnt toast on Sundays. Coulson still ran his tech firm, smaller now, more intentional. Alexis? She opened her own boutique branding agency. She called it Rooted. No slick buzzwords, no fake urgency. Just branding built from values. Voice, story, truth. One afternoon, Alexis sat with a new intern at Rooted. The girl was nervous, full of questions. But what stayed with Alexis was her last one. "How did you know when your life had changed for good?" Alexis paused. She didn't give a motivational quote. She didn't name a moment. She simply said, "When I stopped waiting for anyone else to validate it." That evening, she came home to Coulson on the porch, grilling vegetables and playing a Miles Davis record on low. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, just watching him. He looked up. "Long day?" "No." "Good day." He nodded toward the sky. "Looks like rain." She stepped down beside him. "It can rain. I'm not going anywhere." Coulson smiled, flipping the zucchini. "I know." And they stood there, not in suspense, not in rescue, but in love. Later that night, Alexis climbed into bed beside Coulson, turning off the lamp. There were no ghosts here, no haunting memories of gala nights or headlines or heartbreaks. Only them, warmth, trust, stillness. She whispered into the dark. "I used to think I had to survive everything, but this feels like I'm living." Coulson reached for her hand beneath the covers. "You are," and the world, with all its noise, grew quiet. At last. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Tell us, was Alexis right to walk away the first time? Or did Coulson truly earn her love back? Tap the like button if you felt the slow, quiet healing of this love. Share this with someone who believes love can return stronger after the storm. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that speak to the heart, and remind you that peace is a love language too.